The screaming started before John saw anything. Not shouting, not calling, screaming. The sound a human voice makes when words have quit and the body is doing the begging. John Callahan pulled his horse to a stop on the canyon trail and listened. He was 22, lean and sunburned, looking for a stray bull from a cattle drive. The canyon walls rose red on both sides, trapping heat like an oven. Sweat ran from his jaw to the saddle horn. He wiped his face and listened harder. 4 voices. Women, coming from the valley below the ridge. And each scream was shorter than the last, the sound of people running out of breath and hope at the same time. He spurred his horse up the ridge and looked down. 4 Apache women ran across the valley floor toward a rock wall. Behind them, 8 Comanche warriors rode hard on painted horses, war cries echoing off the canyon like thunder trapped in a bottle. 2 of the women were young and fast. A third was older, limping, losing ground with every step. And the 4th, the tallest, had stopped running. She stood between the warriors and the other 3 with her arms spread wide, her body a wall. She wasn't screaming. She was the only one not screaming. She was silent, and her dark eyes burned with something that looked like fury dressed up as prayer. The warriors were 50 yards out, 40, 30. John didn't think. His body decided before his brain got a vote. He drew his Colt, fired 2 shots into the air, and charged down the ridge. His horse slid on loose rock and nearly dumped him into the dirt. He leaned back and let gravity do the work. He hit the valley floor at a full gallop, dust erupting behind him in a gold cloud. 8 warriors turned. They expected a war party, not a single cowboy riding straight at them with a face that said he'd already made peace with whatever happened next. John fired at the ground in front of the lead horse. The animal reared and threw its rider. A second warrior swung a war club. John ducked against his horse's neck, and the club whistled past his ear. A third warrior charged with a lance. John veered left, and the lance scraped his horse's flank. A thin line of blood on the brown coat. The tall woman moved. While John pulled the warrior's attention, she shoved the other 3 toward a narrow crack in the rock wall. The women squeezed through, one by one. The limping one struggled. The tall woman lifted her and pushed her into the crack. Then she turned. Her eyes found John across 30 yards of dust and noise. Dark eyes. Burning. Not grateful. Not afraid. A question, aimed at the center of his chest. Then she disappeared into the rock. 8 warriors. 1 cowboy. But the women were gone, and John didn't need to win. He needed to leave. He wheeled his horse and bolted east toward a gap between 2 rock towers. Too narrow for the bigger painted horses. His mount squeezed through with inches to spare. The lead warrior's horse crashed into stone. The second piled into the first. Shouts. Dust. John kept riding. By the way, if this story has you hooked, hit subscribe and drop a comment with your country and the time where you are right now. I love knowing where in the world you are. Now keep listening, because what happens next will surprise you. What followed was the worst hour of John's life. He galloped through twisting canyons while the warriors split up. 3 behind him, 5 circling wide to cut him off. They were herding him south toward open ground. John recognized the trap. He'd watched wild horses get herded the same way, but he knew a dead-end canyon ahead with a hidden exit, a crack covered by brush. He rode straight for the dead end. The warriors behind him shouted with triumph. They thought he was boxed. John reached the wall, jumped off his horse, tore through the brush, and pulled his horse through the crack. The warriors rounded the corner, and found nothing but empty rock. The shouts turned to cursing. John stood on the other side, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, breathing so loud he could hear his own heartbeat over everything. His horse panted beside him. They were alive. He sat in a cave that night, watching the stars come out. His hands shook on his knees. Blood from his forehead had dried into a red crescent on his sleeve. He was alive. The women were alive. That should have been the end. But it wasn't, because the tall woman's face, dark, silent, arms spread, burning, was already seared into the back of his eyes the way the sun burns into your vision after you stare too long. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her voice. He had 30 seconds of memory, and those 30 seconds would take up more room in his chest than the next 7 years of living. He didn't know those women would come looking for him. He didn't know they'd ride 3 months to find him. He didn't know they'd stand in front of him and say 2 words that would split his quiet life down the middle, like an axe through dry pine. All he knew was that he'd done the right thing, and a woman's eyes had asked him a question he couldn't name, and the question would follow him home and stay. 7 years turned John Callahan from a young cowboy into a quiet man. Young cowboys ride fast, talk loud, and believe every sunset is a promise. Quiet men build fences, eat alone, and know the sunset is just the sky changing color, and it doesn't care about your plans. By 29, John owned 40 acres of scrubland. He'd bought it with 7 years of wages, $1 at a time, breaking horses for the army. The land wasn't pretty. Brown and flat, mesquite and creosote bush, and a well he'd dug by hand. But it was his. He built the cabin himself, mesquite posts and river stone, 1 room, 1 window, 1 door. He built a table, ate at it alone every night, built a corral, raised 6 horses, trained them by standing in the corral doing nothing, waiting for the horse to come to him, waiting until curiosity beat fear. Nobody else had the patience for it, but it made horses so loyal they'd walk through fire. His parents died when he was 12. Fever took them both in the same week. His sister died the next winter. Same fever. John had been alone since cattle drives, bunkhouses, barns, open sky, always moving, because standing still meant remembering, and remembering hurt. At 29, he was tired of moving. He wanted roots, but roots in empty soil just make a man stuck in his own loneliness. His closest neighbor was Esteban Vega, 70 years old, silver mustache curled at the tips like 2 small smiles, 7 children, 2 dead wives, and an opinion about everything. He came every Sunday with tamales and unsolicited wisdom. "You are building a beautiful prison, mijo," Esteban said, watching John eat alone at his table for one. "Horses get more room each year. You get less." John shrugged. "I like quiet. Quiet and empty are cousins. They look the same, until you live with one long enough to know the difference." 3 months before the women arrived, something happened that would matter more than John realized. He was mending the south fence when he heard a child screaming from the direction of the river road. He grabbed his rifle and rode hard. What he found made his blood hot. 2 drifters, unshaven, drunk, mean-looking, had stopped the neighbor's wagon. Don Roberto, the father, was on the ground with blood on his face. His wife Carmela held their 8-year-old daughter Rosa behind her. The drifters wanted the horses. Roberto had said no. The first drifter had hit him with a pistol butt. The second was cutting the horses loose from the wagon while Rosa screamed and screamed. John didn't announce himself. He rode up behind the man, cutting horses, grabbed him by the collar, and threw him off the wagon so hard he bounced when he hit the dirt. The second drifter spun with his pistol raised. John aimed his rifle at the man's chest from 6 feet. "You can ride out," John said. His voice was flat, calm, the voice of a man who had charged 8 warriors alone and found that 2 drunks barely registered on his fear. "Or you can find out how good I am with this rifle. Pick one. Pick fast." The drifter looked at John's eyes. Whatever he saw there, the canyon, the ridge, the specific absence of hesitation, was enough. Both men mounted and rode south without looking back. Roberto tried to give John money. Carmela tried to give him food. Rosa, 8 years old, black hair wild from screaming, tears drying on her dusty cheeks, walked up to John and hugged his leg. "When I grow up," she said, looking up at him with enormous brown eyes, "I'm going to marry someone brave like you." Everyone laughed. John knelt down so his eyes were level with hers. "You're going to marry someone who deserves you, little one, and that's a much higher bar than brave." He rode home alone. Behind him, Carmela said to Roberto, "That man needs a family. It's a crime for a heart that big to have nobody to give it to." And Rosa, watching John ride away, said to no one in particular, "He looked sad." 8 years old, and she'd seen it. The sadness John had built fences around, the loneliness he'd hammered into the architecture. An 8-year-old saw through all of it in one hug. The truth John never told anyone was the face. 7 years. Every night. The tall woman. Arms spread. Silent. Burning. He didn't know her name. He had 30 seconds of memory, and those 30 seconds occupied more space in his chest than 7 years of living. He'd tried once. A schoolteacher named Eleanor. Kind hands. Sweet laugh. They walked together 4 times. On the 4th walk, she held his hand, and he felt nothing, as if the part of him that responds to touch had been spent on a canyon ridge when a woman looked at him and asked something without words. He let Eleanor go gently and didn't walk with her again. John was hammering a fence post on a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Hoofbeats. Not a gallop. A steady, measured walk. He looked up. 4 riders. Coming from the south. His hand went to his Colt, then dropped. Because even at a distance, he could see the posture. Upright. Fluid. Born to the saddle. And their shapes against the sunrise were clearly women. 4 women, riding toward his ranch, from the direction of the canyon. His heart started beating the way it had beaten on a ridge 7 years ago. Hard. Fast. The rhythm of a man who knows the longest silence of his life is about to break. They stopped at his gate in a line. Not random. Deliberate. The tallest in the center. 2 on her right. 1 on her left. A formation that spoke before anyone opened their mouth. John stood at his fence, holding a hammer in one hand and his hat in the other, because he'd taken it off without meaning to. The way a man takes off his hat when something sacred walks into the room. The 4 women dismounted, together, smooth, graceful, the way birds land. Buckskin and leather, beadwork, quillwork, turquoise woven into dark braids that caught the sun and threw tiny blue sparks. They moved like one body. Sisters, bonded by something deeper than blood. The tall woman stepped forward. 7 years had sharpened her. The softness of youth had been carved away, and what was left was all edge and bone and fire. Cheekbones that threw shadows. Dark eyes that burned exactly the way they'd burned across 30 yards of canyon dust. A small scar at the corner of her mouth that hadn't been there before. She stopped 3 feet from John, close enough to smell sage and wood smoke, and the clean scent of a woman who'd bathed in every river between here and wherever she'd started. "John Callahan," she said. His name sounded polished, practiced, carried for years like a stone held so long it had gone smooth. You remember. Not a question. Every single night, John said, and the honesty fell out of him, like a rock out of a pocket. Unplanned, heavy, true. I am Ayanna, she said. These are my sisters, Dolly. Short, strong, hands calloused from constant work, eyes already scanning John's cabin the way a builder scans a leaning wall. Istas, the youngest, maybe 23, still and quiet, with a calm that made the air around her feel softer. And Kaya. John looked at the fourth woman, and something in his chest shifted like a door swinging open on a hinge he didn't know was there. Kaya wasn't looking at his face. She was looking at his hands, the hammer, the calluses, the scars on his knuckles. She studied his hands the way other people study eyes, as if hands told a more honest story. We searched 3 years, Ayanna said. Trading posts, forts, cattle drives. We described a cowboy who rode alone into a canyon against 8 warriors. People remembered the story. Nobody remembered the name. 6 months ago, a horse trader told us about a man who trains horses by waiting, who has a scar on his forehead shaped like a crescent moon. Her eyes went to the white scar above his eyebrow. John touched it without thinking. We knew, she said. He cleared his throat. You didn't need to ride 3 months to thank. We did not come to say thank you. The air changed. All 4 women straightened. Ayanna looked at her sisters. Each nodded. Then she turned to John. We have come to ask you to marry us. The words landed on him like a horse stepping on his chest. All 4 of us love you, each in her own way, each truly. In our tradition, a man who saves a woman creates a bond the universe sees, even if the people don't. You saved 4. The bond is fourfold. We offer ourselves, not as debt, but as honor. You may choose all, one or none. There is no shame in any answer. She paused. We have carried this 7 years. It is time to set it down. The silence that followed was the loudest sound John had ever heard. 4 women. 1 question. A man holding a hammer and a hat. But here's the thing nobody expected. Not the women, not John, not even the story itself. The answer he would give wouldn't be the answer anyone saw coming. Not even close. And the road to that answer would nearly kill him first. Come inside. I'll put coffee on. Not an answer. A delay, wearing a hospitality costume. The 4 women followed him into the cabin. 1 window, 1 chair, 1 plate, 1 bed. 5 people filled it completely. John saw his home through their eyes, and the word that came to mind was Esteban's. Prison. A beautiful prison built by a man who'd made loneliness look like a choice. Stay 14 days, he said. Let me know you, not as the women I saved, as the women you are now. Ayanna looked at her sisters. The 4-way glance lasted half a second and contained more information than most spoken paragraphs. We will stay, Ayanna said. But know this, each of us has loved you since that canyon. Whatever you choose, you're choosing, between hearts that already chose you. Ayanna worked beside him every morning. She understood horses the way he did, through patience, not force. She found a stone bruise in his best mare that he'd missed completely, treated it with a poultice of creosote and sage. 3 days later, the mare was sound. How did you know? John asked. I listen to what the body says when the mouth cannot speak. It was a sentence about horses. It was a sentence about everything. In the evenings they talked, short conversations, the exchanges of 2 people who respect silence more than noise. She told him about the reservation, short rations, shorter dignity. She'd become a healer because healing was the one thing the government couldn't confiscate. Dolly fixed things. In 4 days, she rehung the sticking door, rebuilt the leaning chicken coop, sharpened every tool until they gleamed. On the 5th day, she ran her hand along the cabin wall. You built this place to be alone. 1 window, 1 chair, 1 plate. You didn't just end up lonely. You hammered loneliness into the walls. John looked at the single window. She was right. The solitude wasn't something that happened to him. It was something he'd built, nail by nail. Istas was quiet, but quiet the way a deep river is quiet, not empty, full. She sat with Esteban on Sunday and listened so well the old man called her the best ears in the territory. She played with Rosa and the neighbor children, inventing games that made them scream with joy. On the 9th day, she sat beside John on the porch and said nothing for 30 minutes, and he realized it was the most peaceful silence he'd ever shared with another person. And Kaya. Kaya confused him. She didn't work horses like Ayana, didn't fix things like Doli, didn't sit in comfortable silence like Istas. Kaya watched. She watched John's hands when he worked, watched his face when he thought no one was looking. On the 3rd day, John found a dead rattlesnake near the corral, head crushed by a rock, body still twitching. The snake had been coiled 6 inches from where his best mare was tied. If it had struck, the mare would have been dead by evening. John looked at the rock, looked at the snake, looked around. Doli was at the chicken coop. Ayana was in the herb garden. Istas was inside. Kaya killed it, Dolly said, without looking up from her work. Saw it from 20 yards, picked up the rock and threw it before any of us knew the snake was there. John found Kaya by the well. The rattlesnake, he said. She shrugged. I was watching. 2 words, but the way she said them, casual, unbothered, as if killing a snake from 20 yards with a thrown rock was the same as pouring coffee, told John something important. Kaya's watching wasn't passive, it was protection. She saw threats nobody else could see, and she moved toward them the way John moved toward danger, before her mind could say no. He filed that. He'd need it later. And on the 7th, evening. While John sat on the corral fence watching the mountains turn copper, Kaya climbed up beside him and said the thing that split him open. Now, if you're already picking which woman John should choose, drop your pick in the comments. Ayana, Doli, Istas, or Kaya. Tell me who you'd choose before we get to his answer, because his answer isn't what you think. You didn't save us because it was the right thing to do. Kaya's voice was quiet. Not soft. Quiet. The voice of someone who listens more than she speaks and has learned that less noise means more truth. She sat beside John on the fence, both facing the mountains, sunset turning the world copper, horses grazing behind them, air smelling like cooling dust and sage. You saved us because you couldn't have survived not saving us, she said. There's a difference, a big one. The first is duty, the second is need. Your body moved before your mind said go. I watched you on that ridge. Your horse was already running down, before you kicked it. Everything, hands, legs, weight, shifted toward us before you decided. That's not bravery. That's instinct. The same instinct that makes a person jump in front of a wagon to push a child clear. No thinking. Just moving. Because standing still while someone dies is a death your body won't allow. Nobody had ever described John like this. Not Esteban with his Sunday wisdom. Not Eleanor with her kind eyes. Kaya had opened him up like a clock and shown him gears he didn't know were turning. How do you know that? He asked. Because I'm the same way, she said, and the air went still. In the canyon, I was the one furthest from the rock wall, closest to the warriors. I put myself there. On purpose. John's breath stopped. He remembered the formation. The tall woman shielding in front, the three behind pressed against rock. He hadn't looked close enough to see positions. He hadn't seen the quiet woman in the back who'd placed herself first in line to be taken. If they reached us, Kaya said, they'd take me first. My body. My time. Buy my sisters 30 seconds to reach the crack. 30 seconds is enough to live or die. She turned. You and I are the same animal, John. We move toward the thing that's coming for the people we love, not because we're brave, because we can't do anything else. Our bodies won't let us stand still. Same animal. The two words sat in the copper air like something carved into stone. Permanent, unhurried, true. And John felt the dizziness of being truly seen, not admired, not wanted, seen. The way one horse sees another across a field and knows, same, not similar, same. I carried a face for 7 years, John said slowly. I thought it was Ayana's. She was in front, the one I saw clearly. He paused. But it wasn't her face. It was the question, the look she gave me on the ridge. And the question wasn't hers. It was the moment asking, what kind of man are you? He turned to Kaya. And you already knew the answer, because you'd answered it yourself, standing closest to the warriors, choosing to be taken first. Kaya looked at him, not at his hands, at his eyes. Her gaze was steady, clear, not burning like Ayana's, present. The gaze of someone who has walked a very long road to reach exactly this spot and is in no hurry to leave. I knew on the ridge, she said, when your body moved before your mind. I saw it, and I knew you were mine. The way an animal knows its own kind from a distance, not by sight, by movement. She looked back at the mountains. Same animal. The sun dropped. The first stars appeared. And on the corral fence, John understood 2 things he'd been too blind to see for 7 years. The face he'd been carrying wasn't a face. It was a mirror. And the woman beside him had been carrying the same mirror, pointed at herself, for exactly as long. But understanding isn't choosing. And the choice that was coming, the choice nobody in this story expected, would happen only after the river tried to kill him first. On the 12th day, the river flooded. Summer rains in the mountains sent water down the valley in a brown, roaring wall. John heard it first, a rumble that made the ground shake and the horses scream. He ran to high ground and looked south. The river had jumped its banks, a mile wide, brown and fast and full of things that don't belong in water. Tree trunks, fence posts, dead brush, rocks the size of barrels. His lower corral was going under. 4 horses were trapped behind a fence now waist-deep in churning brown water, heads above the surface, eyes white, legs churning at mud that kept disappearing beneath them. John ran, the same way he'd charged down the ridge, the same way he'd ridden toward the drifters who had Roberto on the ground, his body moving before his mind had a say. He hit the water at a run, and the cold grabbed his legs. The current pulled at his knees, thighs, chest. At the corral gate, the water was at his ribs. His pulled the latch. 3 horses lunged free. The 4th, the mare Ayana had healed, was tangled in downed wire under the surface. Every kick tightened the wire. She was drowning herself trying to escape. John dove. Brown water. Blind. Found the wire by feel. Cut 1 strand with his belt knife. 2. The mare kicked and caught his shoulder. Pain shot down his arm like lightning. He cut the 3rd strand. The mare surged free. John tried to follow, but the current caught him sideways. Head under. Tumbling. Up and down mixed together. Lungs screaming. Something hit his back. A log. The pain was distant, far away, belonging to a body starting to quit. The world went black at the edges. This is how I die, he thought. Not on a ridge, not in a canyon. In brown water. Alone. Hands. 2 pairs. Grabbing his coat. Pulling. He broke the surface, coughing, and saw Ayanna and Kaya in the water beside him, soaked, fighting the current, gripping his coat with strength that shouldn't exist in water this violent. On the bank, Dolly had a rope tied to the corral post. Istas hauled on the far end, her whole body leaned back. 4 women in concert, 1 throwing, 1 pulling, 2 in the water holding a drowning man. They hauled him onto the mud. He lay coughing river water. His shoulders screamed. He rolled over. 4 faces above him. Ayanna fierce, Dolly practical, Istas frightened, Kaya calm. "You're a fool," Dolly said. "You went in alone." But the flood wasn't done. The water was still rising. Brown water was now 20 yards from the cabin, and rising fast. "The cabin," Dolly said, her eyes going wide. "Everything's inside. She stopped. Her saddlebag, the trading post drawings, the floor plans she'd worked on for years, the dream she'd never told anyone about except with pencil lines on paper. Kaya was already running, before anyone spoke, before anyone decided. Her body moved the way John's moved on the ridge. Before the mind could say no, she ran into the flooding cabin. Water was ankle-deep on the floor and rising. She grabbed one thing. Not the tools, not the supplies. Dolly's saddlebag. She emerged soaking wet, holding the leather bag against her chest, and placed it in Dolly's hands. Dolly stared at her, water dripping from both of them. "Why these?" Kaya said, "Because I watched you draw them, and your hands moved the way John's moved on the ridge, before your mind could say stop. That's not a hobby, Dolly. That's a calling, and callings don't drown in floods." Dolly pressed the saddlebag against her chest. Her lips trembled. The practical woman, the one who fixed things without emotion, trembling, because someone had seen her secret dream and run into a flood to save it. Ayanna looked at John, her healer's hands pressed against his chest. "7 years ago, you saved us from a canyon," she said. Her voice cracked, the first time he'd ever heard it crack. "Today, we saved you from a river. The debt is paid. The scales are balanced. Whatever you say next, whatever you choose, it comes from a place that owes nothing. It is free. It is pure. It is yours." She was right. The ledger was clean. No debt. No obligation. And 4 women, soaked and shaking and covered in river mud, waited for a man they'd pulled from a flood to answer a question that had been traveling toward him for 7 years. That night, after the water dropped and the cabin was drying and the horses were safe on high ground, John walked to the corral fence alone. Stars filled the sky. The air smelled like wet earth and mesquite. He gripped the fence rail and stared into the dark and did the thing nobody expected. He seriously considered telling all 4 of them to leave. Not because he didn't love Kaya, because the flood had shown him what losing feels like. The brown water filling his lungs, the world going dark. The specific terror of knowing that if he died, someone would grieve. And grief. He knew grief. He'd lived inside it since he was 12. Parents, sister, gone. The safest way to never cause grief is to never be loved. The single window, the single chair, the single plate, the prison Esteban had named. John gripped the fence rail until his knuckles went white, and the old instinct said, "Close the window. Lock the door. Send them away. Be safe. Be alone. Be empty. You are standing very still for a man who just survived a river." Esteban's voice came from the dark. The old man appeared beside the fence, silver mustache catching starlight, tamale nowhere in sight. For once, he'd come without food, just himself. He sat on the fence beside John. "You are afraid of choosing," Esteban said. "Not a question." "I'm afraid of losing," John said. "Everyone I've loved died. Yes, your parents, your sister. And now 4 women stand in your cabin, and you think choosing one means losing her eventually, and the losing will destroy you." John looked at him. "How did you bury 2 wives and keep going?" Esteban was quiet for a long time. Stars moved. A coyote sang in the distance. "I didn't keep going," the old man said. "I kept loving. Going is what your feet do. Loving is what your chest does. They are different muscles, mijo. Your feet can stop. Your chest cannot. You can stand still in a field forever. But your heart keeps beating. And a heart that beats with no one to beat for, that is not safety. That is the slowest death there is." John stared at the dark mountains. "She'll die someday. Everyone does." "Yes, and the grief will be terrible, and you will survive it. You know how I know." "How?" "Because you already survived it. You were 12 years old and you survived losing everyone. And you are still here, still building fences, still saving strangers in canyons, still pulling children from dirt roads. A man who survives grief at 12 can survive it at 50. But a man who avoids love to avoid grief, he dies at 12 and just keeps walking around pretending he didn't." The coyote sang, again, closer now. John's grip on the fence rail loosened. "She's the one," John said. Not a question. Esteban almost smiled. "I know. I knew the moment she killed that rattlesnake from 20 yards without making a sound. Same animal." John looked at him sharply. "You heard that?" "Miko, I hear everything. I am 70 years old. Hearing is the only sense I have left that still works properly." John waited 3 more days, not because he hadn't decided, because some words need the right ground, the right light. You don't plant a tree in a storm. You wait for the morning after. On the 15th morning, he set 4 chairs at his table, made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. The women sat. John stood. He'd rehearsed for 2 nights, but looking at their faces, Ayana steady, Dolly sharp, Istas calm, Kaya watching his hands as always. The rehearsed words burned, and the real ones came through. "Ayana," he said. She lifted her chin. "You stood in front of 3 women with your arms spread and didn't make a sound. You are the bravest person I've ever met. Your hands heal things that should stay broken." He paused. "But you are a leader. Your people need you in front, not behind a corral fence. If you stayed here, the world would shrink around you, and I refuse to be the man who makes Ayana smaller." Her eyes filled. She nodded once, slow, heavy. A woman who knows a truth and hates it and accepts it in the same heartbeat. "Dolly," he said. She met his gaze directly. "You rebuilt my cabin in 12 days. You see what's broken and fix it before anyone asks." He paused. "But you don't need fences to fix. You need something to build." He looked at her carefully. "I know about the trading post drawings. I saw them before the flood. And Kaya ran into a flooding cabin to save them, because she saw what I saw, that those drawings aren't a hobby. They're a calling." Dolly's eyes went wide, then wet. The practical woman. Crying. Because 2 people had seen her secret dream, and one of them had risked her life for it. "Build it, Dolly. Don't fix my chicken coop. Build your trading post." "Istas," he said gently. "You made Esteban laugh harder than he's laughed in 10 years. You made Rosa forget she was shy. You have a gift I can't even name. The gift of making people feel real." A tear slid down her cheek. The children at the reservation need that gift. Not one cowboy. 100 children who've forgotten what it feels like to be seen. Istas wiped her cheek. "You're a kind man, John." "I'm an honest man. Honest is harder." Then he turned to Kaya. The cabin went quiet. The quiet of a room holding its breath. Kaya was looking at his hands. As always, reading the calluses and scars and the way his fingers wrapped around the coffee cup. She hadn't looked up. She was waiting. She'd been waiting 7 years. "Kaya," he said, and his voice changed. Lower, rougher, like the words had to climb over something in his throat. "You told me I didn't save you because it was right. You told me I saved you because I couldn't survive not saving you. Then you told me you'd done the same. Put yourself closest to the warriors. Buying time with your body." He set his cup down. "You called us the same animal. And then you proved it. You ran into a flooding cabin to save Dolly's drawings the way I ran into a canyon to save 4 strangers, before your mind could say no." He walked to her chair. He knelt. Not because it was traditional, because his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "I spent 7 years carrying a face. I thought I was carrying a memory. I wasn't. I was carrying a mirror. And when you sat on that fence and told me what I am, what you are, I saw myself for the first time in my life." He took a breath. Same animal should run together." Kaya's hands reached out and held his face, the way you hold something you've traveled 3 months of desert to find. She pressed her forehead against his, a gesture that means, "I share my thoughts with you." Their foreheads touched, their breathing lined up, and the cabin built for 1 window, 1 chair, 1 plate, held 5 people, and felt for the first time like it had room enough for everything. Ayanna stood first, hand on his shoulder. "She is the right choice. I knew before you did." Dolly stood. "I'm building that trading post. You're both invited to the opening." Istas smiled through her tears. "Your children will call me Aunt, and I will teach them every story our people have ever told." Then Dolly looked at the single window. "First thing, a second window. This place is too dark for a family." Everyone laughed. 5 voices in a room that had known only one for 3 years. They married in the fall, under a sky so wide it looked like the world was showing off. Esteban officiated because nobody else could make sacred words sound both holy and funny in the same breath. Rosa was the flower girl. She told John at the ceremony, "I told you. Someone brave." Ayanna returned to the reservation and became the lead healer, then the council voice, then the woman who stood in front of her people the way she'd stood in the canyon, shielding, silent, burning. Dolly built her trading post at the river crossing. 2 years later, the most successful business for 100 miles. She never fixed another man's fence. She built her own walls. Istas opened a school on the reservation, teaching children in their own language, with their own stories, with the gift of making every child feel real. And Kaya stayed. She stayed on the 40-acre ranch with the mesquite cabin and the 6 horses, and the man whose body moves toward danger before his mind can say no. She added a second window, then a second chair, then a second plate, then a cradle, and on the top rail of the corral fence, the same fence where she'd sat beside him at sunset and said the 2 words that unlocked everything, she carved into the wood with a knife. Small. "You'd Only see it if you sat on the fence at dusk and looked down. Same animal. 2 words. An entire love story. Carved into wood that would outlast both of them. And the horses grazed, and the river flowed, and 2 people who had seen each other across a canyon before they knew each other's names sat on that fence every evening and watched the mountains turn copper and never once ran out of things not to say. Because silence, between the same animals, is its own language. And it says everything. If this story stayed with you, if the corral fence or the forehead touch or same animal carved in wood is sitting in your chest right now, leave a like and subscribe to Wild West Talehouse. The frontier still has stories, and the best ones are about the people who knew each other before they ever spoke.